We are live here at Coffee with Humans with my new friend, Julie Wald. Julie, welcome to Coffee with Humans.
Thanks for having me.
So, it is winter out where I'm at in Northern Illinois. I don't know yet where you are. Where are you?
I am in Connecticut. It's winter here.
Connecticut. Oh, is it snowy?
Well, we had some snow before Christmas. It was a white Christmas. But since then we've had a fair amount of rain and now there is no more snow on the ground.
Oh no. I hate that about this kind of tepid time of year where because I'm a purist when it comes to winter. I want snow and cold, and then I want it to stay that way until spring when it all thaws out. And I just don't like it when it gets all the snow is gone. I don't know.
Yeah, that's how my husband feels actually. I don't feel the same way, but he feels gypped when we don't get enough. If we're gonna do winter, let's do winter. Like none of this wishy-washy winter kind of a thing.
No. Well, we were fortunate. Just recently, we did not have a white Christmas because Illinois just didn't get in the game at that time, probably COVID or something. And then right afterwards, we got a lot of snow, which was great. And then fog, this like snowy fog things came in, and now all of the trees are coated in, I think it's called rime ice or something. It's like those fake trees that you blow the snow on and you wonder if there's a tree underneath of it. That's what all of the trees and the bushes and everything looks like. It's absolutely wonderful and gorgeous and levels up our little city. So
yeah, it sounds sparkly and beautiful.
I'm excited. So Coffee with Humans, how did you find out about Coffee with Humans, and what inspired you to click the button to have coffee with me?
Yeah, well, someone on my team sort of forwarded me this and said, you should do this. And I took a look and really, to be honest, the reason why I was open to doing it is really twofold. The first is because I just appreciated the intention around the authenticity and just the openness of this conversation. I've learned both in my work as a social worker and as a wellness professional that network diversity is really important, and having conversations with all different kinds of people is really, really good for our mental health and well-being. And so just the opportunity to speak with different people who aren't in my immediate circle is something that I'm really trying to welcome in, particularly during the pandemic when those interactions are a little less organic. Yeah. And secondly, because my background in what we're doing is really important part of the conversation right now, because people are suffering a lot. And so any opportunity that I have to talk out loud about that and to converse with another interesting, intelligent person is something that I welcome in. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Well, I hope to contribute to your expectation of interesting and intelligent. So we'll see. So one of the things you wrote in as you were signing up for your time here on Coffee with Humans was that you wanted to talk about mental health, and you said mental health crisis, and you expanded it into a national mental health crisis. And I'm curious, those are strong words. Those are big words. How do you view, or what do you view as the crisis when you think of national mental health crisis?
Yeah. So, amazing question. So so one of the things that I do is we work a lot with organizations, some really large organizations that employ a lot of people. And one of the things that those organizations do is they come to us, to support their employees around mental health and well-being. And we've been doing this since 2003. Now, one of the thing that's been really interesting since the pandemic started is that, the need for that support in organizations around mental health has dramatically increased, and the statistics are actually pretty staggering. So I think Kaiser Family Foundation put out a survey several months ago around the fact that pre-pandemic, maybe 15 to 20% of US employees would identify themselves as having kind of a pre-existing mental health issue, anxiety, depression. Maybe they sought out external help from a mental health professional. Maybe they use their company's EAP or employee assistance program. but that was kind of the baseline in our pre-pandemic, already stressed out culture. And really what we've seen in the statistics that I saw as of this fall were that number has now gone north of 60% of people are concerned about their mental health and well-being. And people are also, and what we hear just out in the field is huge levels of concern and crisis, not only about people's own mental health, but the mental health of their children, the mental health of their aging parents. And so that's really where that concept of crisis or that word comes to mind, because I think on the heels of the pandemic, the ramifications on a mental health basis are just enormous. They're already here and they're going to be with us for a long time.
Yeah, because the word crisis seems to be a word that's very acute in nature, right? So it's a time, it's a period, and has to be dealt with. And if it's not dealt with, then terrible things happen. And if it is dealt with, then we get out, maybe better for it, but at least we get out of it. And it seems, and I've heard other people talk about this idea of, mental health crisis. And one of the I had a podcast with the gentleman, Mark Metry. He wrote a book called Screw Being Shy. He talks about, instead of using the word mental health, he talks about brain health and expanding the conversation outside of just the things that we think about and how we reason into a more holistic nature of our brain is a physical entity as well. It's not just, electrical impulses bopping around. It's a physical entity that's also built on or connected to our body and what we take into our bodies. And he kind of expanded this whole thing into, why, in terms of mental health, people ought to be talking also about what you eat and how you care for yourself, how you care for your body. What time do you wake up? What time do you go to bed? What sort of routines do you have in place for your physical nature, so as to help your mental nature, because the two are so inextricably linked. And it seems that maybe, and it's just a layman's opinion, obviously, but it seems that disrupting routine now also has disrupted our mental capacity as well, and how we think, and has led us, maybe some folks, certainly me in some ways, down the roads that we can classify as, hey, we got a mental health issue. When is it now just being caused, or was it always there? What's the onset nature of it is part of the issue. How do we get into this crisis? What are the leading indicators? And I don't have an answer for it, but clearly a lot of the world has changed. What are you seeing as some of those interconnections, and how much of it has to do with the fact that people are now at home, not in a routine, not eating healthily, not taking care of themselves in the ways that they would have had they, had to go to a job. Or maybe there are some people who've lost their jobs too, I suppose, and they don't have a routine. They don't have any of these things that are binders, maybe, that keep a life together.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. So basically, what we think of and what we talk a lot about and I do a lot of speaking on this, is what we call the 4 pillars of wellness. And this is, and when we say wellness, we're talking about mental health and physical health and well-being, sort of that global well-being, because they're inextricable, really. And really those 4 pillars, as we have coined them at Namaste, are movement, stillness, connection, and nourishment. Okay. So the idea is that these are sort of like the 4 basic food groups that you need, these are the ingredients that a newborn baby needs to thrive. I don't know if you're a parent. I have 3 kids. Anybody who's had a kid knows that that baby needs to get just enough movement, enough rest, good food, and enough connection. And if there's no other underlying major issue, they'll be okay. And what happens is, as early as elementary school, people start to forget about the importance of these 4 pillars. All of a sudden the kids up late doing homework and eating, junk food all the time, and those 4 pillars start to slip. And by the time we reach adulthood, oftentimes there's just major gaping holes in people's fundamental practices or habitual behavior that set us up for mental and physical health and well-being.
Yeah.
You combine kind of that baseline with the fact that during a pandemic, so many of the activities that we did to support ourselves, to stay in sort of mental health language, in what's called a window of tolerance for stress. So, for example, maybe you went out to dinner with friends once or twice a week. Maybe you went to the Y. Maybe you had a group fitness class, or, there's a lot of different things that you may have done that were really the way that you stayed healthy amidst an already stressful experience, and those keep you in your window of tolerance. When those things go away, all of a sudden, people are floundering. And that's what happened when the pandemic first started. It was like the people, who had these fundamental behaviors and routines that really are what help them manage stress day to day, all of a sudden had to create completely new behavior patterns and completely new habits. And that is way easier said than done. It's behavior change is extraordinarily challenging.
Yeah.
And so it can also be really, really simple, but it's definitely not easy. And so I think you kind of mix all of those things together. The fact that we were stripped of these coping strategies, that bringing on new behaviors is hard. And many of us were already coming to the table with perhaps an imbalanced kind of 4 pillars already, that all of a sudden the structure becomes really shaky. And if you have an underlying predisposition, maybe it runs in your family, to anxiety or depression or any of these issues that historically you've been able to kind of keep at bay, which most people do, we're all managing these sort of liabilities. All of a sudden, that the ability to keep those things at bay disappears. And that's why we're seeing so many teenagers fall into like really intense depressions right now. And all through the life cycle, people are kind of managing that weakest link.
Yeah, it seems that people do have a window of tolerance that their bodies and their minds can cope with, and I think each of us have a either more narrow or a wider window of tolerance of the different circumstances outside of the quote unquote day to day or normal that we can tolerate with relative ease. And if we spend too much time on one side or the other, either too exciting or too depressing, then things start to get a little wacky. And we don't know what we're doing. It's just like wandering in a fog, and all of a sudden the fog becomes darkness, and then that leads to all sorts of negative things. It seems to me also, and maybe you're experiencing this, I don't know. When we find ourselves in new situations, we tend to follow them. If we think of it like a map, we're on this journey. We find ourselves in a new situation. We go to the nearest map we can find mentally, and it's usually the one we grew up with. What did mom or dad do? And if it's not mom or dad, it's who is that other person that I respected or I liked? How did they do it? And then that becomes our accepted norm. And it gives us some confidence, I think, to at least to move through it, or at least blame the other person and say, well, but that mom, dad, that's what dad did, right? And then we find ourselves in this situation where where some of the things that people have intuitively come to trust or intrinsically come to trust, like I have a job, it pays me money, and the economy continues, and the restaurants don't just randomly close. There has been the massive change to a map that nobody has, right? And I think, and I hate to say it, but I think there's some goodness in this that we just haven't experienced as maybe this last generation, my generation, or the prior generation to some degree, which count 2 or 3 generations ago, you're having world wars that people are fighting, and they're being shipped off to, again, this map, like, how do we deal with this stuff? I don't know. And they learn through it. We've had relative ease, at least in the US, we've had relative ease for 50 years, where the economy is pretty good. I mean, we bitch about it, Healthcare, the best in the world, but we bitch about it. Education, really good, but we bitch about it. And all of a sudden we end up in the situations like, what if all of these things that we rely on aren't, what if they don't work? Are we still able, like in this, was like this vast thing, am I still able to eat, to clothe myself, to live, to speak to a neighbor, to, right? Strip away all those things. And that's like, boom, now what do I have? And it's massive, quick inventory, it seems. And I just don't know that we've been prepared as the handful of generations to take that sort of inventory and say, okay, if I had to build this from a foundation up, what does that foundation even look like? I don't know.
Totally. No, we've been stripped of our frame of reference. Usually, as you mentioned, like we either do something similar to how our parents did it, or we do it the opposite of how they did it because of whatever our feelings are, or we have some relationship to things that we're responding to. And what's happened is that you're right, nobody that's dealing with this alive today, for the most part, except maybe people who are very, very, very old, have any frame of reference for this. We don't know, do you let your kids go on screens 15 hours a day because it's a pandemic and, they can't leave the house? Or do you let them have no screens? Or nobody knows. All the rules suddenly changed overnight. And, one of the things that we talk about in sort of mental health world is this concept of, when you're not in your window of tolerance, you're either sort of in a hyper aroused or a hypo aroused state, which is kind of what you described loosely. And my friend forwarded me this post from Instagram, I think it was at the beginning of the pandemic. And it said, either I'm cleaning the baseboards with a Q-tip or I can't get out of bed. And it's right. Like one or the other, and that's like an example of when we're not operating in our window of tolerance, we're sort of in these extreme states. And I don't know about you, but I totally related to that and definitely cleaned the baseboards with a Q-tip at one point when all of a sudden I realized my house is really gross when all of these people have been living here and not leaving for so many weeks and months on end. And definitely experienced days when, getting out of bed was just not really happening. So
I agree. I think that also leads us to this idea of, people need to have some sense of control of their lives. And we, as, at least in the US, have had a significant amount of control of our lives. We've come to rely on that. And then all of a sudden, when we're being told extrinsically, that you can't go shopping, you can't go out to eat, you can't do these things for risk of death. I mean, it was that big. Like, for risk if you're going to catch the thing that's going to kill you, which, okay, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But it's this all of a sudden this extrinsic pressure, and like you talked about, it's like, well, you say you talk about what are the rules? All the rules have changed. I don't know what the rules are. What are the boundaries? And if I step outside of it, I die. So I want to go into, I think people tend to go into this point of what can I control today? What can I control now? It's like, okay, I can control the cleanliness of my house, and I will. And it's just like, it's satisfying to simply get control, right? Control back. Is it meaningless? Maybe, but but shoot, in that moment, it's everything because I can Q-tip control that. Ryan, one of our listeners here, regarding kids and teens, do you think the information be taught in the schools could be factor in the increasing depression rates? Which, I mean, that's an interesting topic too. Even our kids have been stripped of their normal, social engagements, and I think there was a rising depression rate. There are rising depression rates anyhow in children because of not being able. I think they've been taught to not socialize to some degree, because they've been sitting on screens. They don't even know how to have conversations. Like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting next to this person. What do I say? Anxiety. What's your take on kids and teens and this increase in depression rates?
Yeah, so I'm a mom of a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So I'm kind of in the,
You're in the thick of it.
in the thick of it, and what I've really, and I've also been a clinical social worker for many years and worked with kids and families for countless years at this point. But I think that just like grown-ups, kids have been stripped with all of those things that help them stay in that window of tolerance. So, if they played sports after school or even went to gym class or had, art class and other types of structure and activity that was part of their day-to-day that helped them really with those four pillars: movement, stillness, connection, and nourishment. Just they were eating meals at a regular time, because you have to eat breakfast, before school, and then you have to eat lunch at lunchtime at school, and they fall into that kind of a structure, that it requires going to bed at a decent hour because you have to wake up earlier. It requires, moving from place to place. It requires, as you said, kind of face-to-face connection with your peers, where you're not on a screen and you're not texting and you're having to have those social interactions. When all of those things get sort of removed and or dramatically changed, they're also left floundering. I mean, my, conversation with my 15-year-old yesterday was, it's absolutely not okay to do school from bed. And he's like, you're crazy. Like, I'm on the honor roll. I do really well. Like, why can't I do school from bed? And I said, well, because no wonder why you can't sleep at night if you don't get out of bed during the day and you're not moving enough. And then, of course, I'm here working all day. So all of a sudden it's some random time of the day and he's hungry. So he just goes in the kitchen and eats 10 cookies because nobody's there to make him lunch or to tell, and so there's this massive dysregulation. And then funny enough, I went to one of my colleagues after I had this conversation with my son, where I attempted to get him out of bed, and P.S. it did not work. But I went to my colleague and I said, I'm sorry, I'm a minute late for this call. I was just having an argument with my son about getting out of bed. And, it was like 1 PM or something. And she started laughing and she said, I just read an article about this, and she forwarded it to me. And this article was all about how for these kids who've had so much loss, that actually like the win for them is, screw you, I'm going to do school from bed. Like if everything else is taken away and I still have to like get up and sit in my desk and pretend to be such a high functioning, student, like, where's the win in it for me here? And so maybe for a 15-year-old, the win is, what? Cool. If I'm not going to do any of these other things, then I'm going to get control over my life, and I'm going to do school from bed because I have control, because this is my show. And, I quickly laughed and I just decided, what? I guess if he is still on honor roll and he's doing all right and he's doing school from bed, like I can't fight that battle anymore. Like me arguing with him about this. I mean, he knows what I do. He knows about the 4 pillars. He's read my book. Like his mom's a wellness expert, so to speak. And so at the end of the day, he needs control over his life. He needs to have whatever his silver lining is version as a 15-year-old. But keep in mind that he's been stripped of all of these other things that keep him mentally and physically healthy on a daily. And it's hard.
Yeah. It is an exercise in do the results, or are results enough? Because there's been lots of conversations in the workplace for years about kind of the results-based work and getting away from this idea that I have to see you every day and watch you as an employer. And if I can count the number of hours you've been there, then somehow you've produced something for me. And therefore, we keep you around. To, moving away from that kind of paradigm into, well, did you get the job done or not? And then maybe it doesn't matter where you did the job or when you did the job. It seems that we've flipped that now onto our kids. And I've got a 14-year-old as well. And I have the same conversation. You got to get out of your damn bed. You cannot sit there with in the dark,
right,
with a screen. She's like, I'm doing my work. I'm like, prove it. It doesn't look like work.
And from the phone, the whole day can actually be done from the phone.
Right. And it seems that okay, well, if they're getting results, how's that play into this idea that we have, you train kids, lead kids in some sort of framework that they can take and run with, because 20 years from now, they're going to be looking back going, well, what was the framework, mom and dad put in front of me, or the people I respected put in front of me to live my life? Because it's extraordinary, like you talked about, it's extraordinarily difficult to make change. It's extraordinarily difficult for adults to put any framework into their lives too. People want to talk about being better, but God bless them, they won't, because they just don't want to put any framework together to do it. It's difficult. So if we don't train our kids as a young age, we're just giving we're making their lives more difficult, only we're not going to see it for the next decade or two. And that's where kind of this insidious part of, hey, the script has been flipped on all of us. Some of us tend to move easily through there, more easily than others through that. And some people, are they getting lost in this because there's not a real way to measure, their processes or their systems that are going to make them successful. And there's the extrinsic pressures have changed dramatically. There are some schools that, the kid gets online and they're required to have the camera on. There are some schools the kid gets online that's just required to have a name and a little box there. I gave a speech they were asking me to talk about jobs or whatever, and I was talking to probably, 50, 60 kids on this Zoom call. And there was one girl talking, and there are 3 other people or 4 other people with their video on. Those other kids, I swear they were asleep. They just turned it on and they sat there, and the teacher didn't know what to do with it. It is interesting that what's going to happen. How do we pay for this, down the road, and are we setting people up for massive failure and significant, not just mental health stuff now, but now when you can't perform 10, 20 years from now because you have no discipline or limited discipline, to me, it's worrisome. And if we're seeing an uptick in depression and, serious mental health issues now that are being fixed through medications or whatever else, it's like, how do we ever get ourselves back on track? I don't know. I have no answers for that. And I'm not, I've never walked a mile in your shoes at all, in terms of social work. And I deal with my own mental issues, but nothing extraordinary, and that's, I don't know. It's a real problem. And I see it in my one kid. She's my 14-year-old. I've got a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old as well. They deal with it in their own ways.
How are they doing with this? That's an interesting age too. The college age kids and young adults. I mean, we work with a lot of companies that have a huge young millennial workforce, or even, and there's so many of these young adults are kind of isolated in their apartments. It's particularly, we're outside of New York City, like, kind of trapped in these tiny little apartments in New York City, and trying to work and being so young and not, I remember when you're young, when I was that age, I was just constantly learning and absorbing from everyone around me. And so, they're operating in a totally different environment. How are your older kids doing?
So I've got, if you take my personality and then slice me down the middle, that's my 2 boys. Those are my oldest guys. And I've got my 21-year-old. He's very quiet. He's an introvert. Once you get to know him, once he gets to know you, he's super comfortable, but he's got high anxiety going into new situations and new people. And I've coached him and forced him at times as a dad to, like, hey, you're going to go to this group. You're going to hang out with these people. Because you have to complete the loop sometimes. It's like, I have super high anxiety, but all of my fears were unfounded and I'm safe. Right? You got to complete the success loop. Just, you can't stay in the high anxiety loop and never see. It's like, it turns out fine. And so I've worked with him in certain situations because I see that, and that I have my own tendencies in that. I'm an introvert, and I have a resistance sometimes to seeing people, but I'll go like, that's fine. I know it's good for me, and I enjoy it. It's not that I don't enjoy people, but there's a resistance. I know the resistance. I feel it. So he's just graduated from school with a finance degree in something else. doesn't have a job yet, and job searches aren't just, go have interviews and whatnot. It's all online. So he's lost. I mean, he's lost in this online universe of not really knowing anybody. It's just, you're always behind some sort of, it's like being behind text messages constantly and emails. It's a totally different world. It's not connected. It's a different type of connection, but it's not connection. Then I've got my second kid. He's 20. He's Mr. Extrovert. Always, always meet new people, always having a great time. He's selling insurance full time while going to school full time in Phoenix or something like that. And he cold calls people constantly to sell them insurance and loves it. And so he couldn't care less whether it was on the phone or whether he had to see in person. It doesn't matter to him. He's just like thrive, 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 go, 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 do. And they are opposites. They are at the extremes. It was interesting though, when they were growing up, they were a year and 6 days apart. So they were like twins. And it was so interesting that the two fed off of one another, and they would have the same friend groups, but it was clear that one of them kind of brought those friends in, and then the other one assimilated into that environment, and vice versa. And now that they are living in separate areas, it's interesting to see them socially just become, remarkably different in how it plays out. It's fascinating to me.
You're making me think of just so many people that I know, and how some people, I mean, listen, there's so much suffering and so much darkness right now. So I just, like, that being said and understood, there are many people that I know who are they say, I'm really loving this pandemic lifestyle. I'm loving never having to go anywhere, or to have people over to entertain, or to, be in big groups, because I'm more of an introvert and I was overwhelmed by this previously busy lifestyle. And then there are people who, really thrive on that human connection and, celebrations and big events and and that's just what, what feeds them, and they're having a very, very different experience. And it's been interesting to sort of watch the way different people are responding to this massive shift in lifestyle. And it's certainly not all bad for everybody. Plenty of people are enjoying the many, silver linings that have come along with our situation. But
I wonder to what degree sometimes we, though, look for, if I use my boys as an example of those, the types of people that you see in the world, and if we were to simplify it, it's the people who naturally thrive in, bigger groups, noisy environments, and the people who, naturally thrive in smaller groups and quiet environments. And each of us is kind of along that spectrum. And I understand it's more complicated than that, but the degree to which we need each other to pull ourselves sometimes out of the thing that we naturally drift into, because each one of those can become a kind of a recalcitrance in its own way. It's like we become so fixed in this environment. I can imagine, and I'm one of them. I'm like, great, I'm in my own little space. I don't have to talk to people. I don't have to see people much. It's harder for me now to go flip the switch into like, and I'm going to go see people, because I've just become kind of settled. It's like settling into one of those, mattresses that like warps around your body. Like, I can't get out. I'll just stay here. I think that there's something that we've missed or lost, which I think will snap back. I think people just kind of snap back, but I feel like we'll snap back into this idea that when we have to see each other face to face and in workplaces with disciplines, that this balance will start to be regained. But it does right now seem to be that we've moved to extremes, and in extremes. I mean, it is what it is. What do you say about it? It's like, yep, it is. But how do people recognize that in themselves? I don't know if everybody recognizes that in themselves and then decides to do something about it. Like, I've been too disconnected.
Right.
Some people just like settle in. And then what do you do?
I hear you. I mean, I don't know the answer, but I do know that, one of the phrases that we use a lot, and I learned it, I don't even know who was the original person who said this, but it's, we are the company we keep. So keep good company. And when we surround ourselves with different types of people, it helps to really bring out kind of the best in us in a way that, even if we strongly lean towards being more introverted, there's still a part of us that needs and thrives off and wants a certain amount of connection. It doesn't mean that we're ever going to be that big, huge party person, and that's, that we don't want to stay an introvert. It's okay to be an introvert, but there's balancing variables that come in so that, another phrase we use a lot is our greatest strength is our greatest weakness. And that's one that my parents used to always say, but it's like that same thing about us that probably makes us pretty awesome in a lot of ways is also a liability. And so, how do we use the people that we surround ourselves and the company we keep to kind of bring out, a more holistic version of ourselves in a way that, that these different sides are being expressed. And I think that's what happens naturally. That's what your boys did, right? They rubbed off on each other, and they were able together to create more community and more connection as a result of that, without taking away their inherent kind of the beauty and specialness of who they are. And, it reminds me of this concept of the 4 pillars again, because we talk a lot about that. It's like, yes, we say movement, stillness, connection, and nourishment, but it's not always even for everybody, right? Some of us are just movers, like that's our primary, but that doesn't mean that we don't need sleep, that we don't need good food, that we don't need connection. Other people just naturally are, geared towards more stillness. They meditate, they like to, read books, and that's a space that they really love. But it doesn't mean that they shouldn't move, but they might not go do an Ironman triathlon because that's not their jam, but they still need, these are the 4 basic ingredients in different amounts based on who you are, because you don't want to take away the essence, of your individual personality, but these other ingredients are needed in order for the cake to rise. And so otherwise it just kind of can fall a little short.
No, that's totally true. I think it does underscore how we each play a role. And if we learn who we are as individuals and spend some time thinking about it, and I think a lot of people just do themselves and the world a disservice by not understanding who they are. But once we understand who we are, we can understand our particular role and how that's so important in our scope of influence, our sphere of influence, the people that we contact each day and we're in our midst. If we bring our fullness into that space, that makes that area, our fullness makes that area better. And when we withhold out of ignorance or out of like, I'm not going to be this person anymore, I'm sorry, you've lost. You're not. You're doing yourself a disservice. You're not. There's a quote. I feel like I keep saying this quote. It's from Carolyn McHugh. And she says, she had a great TED talk. The quote is something like, most of us don't take up nearly the space the universe intended for us. And it's like that. Wow. Most of us don't take up nearly the space the universe intended for us. And there's all sorts of reasons we don't take up that space or don't bring ourselves into our fullness in that space. And then we look back. It's the person, it's the 80-year-old you talk to and you say, hey, tell me about your life. And they're like, I wish I could have, and I wish I should have. And I coulda, shoulda, woulda, versus the person who's like, man, you've done all of those things. You did what? And it's a very different spirit they radiate, right? The person who has lived into their fullness and the person who has not. And what an opportunity for us in the moment as we see it to go, I intend to live into my fullness. What does that mean? Right? And we intuitively know what it is. And we're just, I think, sometimes a little stuck and sometimes a little lost, and sometimes need somebody else to invite us in. Say, hey, this space is for you. Because like you say, there's some people who are naturally movers, and there's some people who are naturally a little more quiet, and there's some people who are gifted in understanding of bodies. And how do you see? So you talk about this in employers, and I know one of your notes said how do you work with employees in this situation? To what degree is this even an employer's responsibility, do you think, when historically at least, the employer is there to provide a paycheck for work received, and it's sort of a transactional environment? It seems we're moving away from the transactional environment into a relationship-based environment, which transactions become a little more nebulous.
Yeah.
What's your view of the world?
Well, it's what we know happens is that, and one of the sort of first reasons why employers think about this is because the well-being, the mental health of their employees impacts their business. It impacts their bottom line. So, one of the statistics we bumped into, again, I think this was from Kaiser Family Foundation, is that, currently employees are losing about 10% of productivity due to all of these issues that we're talking about, the stress-related issues. And if you're an employer that employs, 1,000 or 10,000 employees, that's a lot of money. If each one of those employees are losing 10% of their productivity. And so if you could invest, $100,000 a year on supporting employees' mental health and well-being, and therefore could gain back $1 million worth of productivity based on your payroll, then that's a good return on investment. The other thing is that mental health issues drive up healthcare costs really significantly. And employers are really concerned about that. That's a big number. And so, if you have diabetes and then you throw on depression, or you throw on, some of these other issues, all of a sudden, I think the statistics is around 200 to 300% increase when you pile on a mental health issue. Because don't forget, mental health issues cause back pain, they cause neck pain, they cause, oftentimes they become a slippery slope to substance abuse issues. It's complicated. And so I think, to be honest, great leaders obviously, lead people and are compassionate and care about people's well-being and want humans that they're connected to be thriving. But they also want their business to thrive, and investing in your human capital around their mental health and well-being is a really good way to manage that. And so yeah, that's why employers care. Both great leaders care because you should care, but they also care because it impacts their business.
Sure. I guess that the line of responsibility then, right, is it changes for each of us, right? Yeah. So how much responsibility, like for my kids, how much responsibility do I take for my 21-year-old? And it's sometimes that line has to move a bit, and the line of responsibility I take for one kid might be a different line I would take for another kid, because of the nature that I see in each of them, and and so I might invite one to take a bit more responsibility for himself, because he is, and he can, and he's thriving in that, whereas somebody else might not be. And it's not that I care about him any less, and it's not that he's not going to be as successful or whatever as the other kid, but it has to be more an individualized approach, it seems, and getting to know the individual, which in an employer-employee scenario, that gets a little dicey, and it becomes, I think, overwhelming. What do you say to a small employer, a person who's got 10 individuals and doesn't have, a system in place, doesn't have an HR team, doesn't have, policies and procedures necessarily in place? Is that better? Is that worse because they've got that high touch environment, or is it easier one way or the other? What do you see, and what do you recommend?
It depends on the leadership's kind of mentality. I think we talk to a lot of organizations, and we believe, and most of the organizations that we work with believe that life is actually really a team game.
Okay.
And that you're not meant to have to figure it all out on your own. And you're a team with your family. Your sons are part of your team, and you're there for them when they need to pass the ball to you, and when you can pass the ball back to them. And sometimes they're going to be limping off the field, and you're going to hold them, and other times you're going to be celebrating the touchdown, and it's going to be everything that you do on a team. And the same thing goes for a work environment. It's a team game. And if you can't kind of look out for each other and try to understand, how can I take off something that's off your plate because I have more bandwidth today, or how can I support you? And I think for smaller teams, it first and foremost, it's just about kind of keeping it real and saying, how's everybody doing? How are you doing? Like, how can we come together in a way that's more supportive as a team? Should we do some sort of a wellness activity, a guided meditation or an experience like that? Or should we do a virtual cocktail hour? Or, what should we do to be a team and to sort of connect together in that way, and to be able to support and help each other? And I think it regardless of the size of the organization, it really is about that intention and communicating that intention, and then figuring out, what the manifestation of that looks like in your organization. And that will vary very greatly depending on the size and the style of the company. But the companies that are approaching this as a team game are really not only surviving through the crisis, but as you met, it's like an opportunity to actually build and thrive. And kind of, we know how it feels when you've gone through a hard time with an old friend or with someone, relationships are built out of shared experiences. That's what builds relationships. That's why you still feel connected to some person you went to high school with that I don't know, went to a million parties with, or, ran through the woods from the suburban cops, if you were me. But you have these bonds with these people because you've had these shared experiences. And I think in an organization, when you can create a safe context for the shared experience, it has the opportunity to really help you kind of come out the other side of this, or even within it, in a much stronger way.
Yeah, it feels like a time of like quicksand. The more you fight it, the more you sink. And instead, it's like, what can I relax into? And then not only relax into, but who can I look around to who's not in that same space, because everybody's not struggling quite the same way, who can help me come out of this. But the more we fight these times of struggle, it seems the harder it becomes to get out of them and move through them. Instead of, like you talk about, shared struggle, shared experiences has a way of bonding us. And when we come out of it, I think, with, ironically, some sort of joy that, man, we did that. That was real shitty, but we did it. And look, and it's like, and now all of a sudden we have that strength we can carry on to the next day and the next moment and come out of it stronger and better, rather than drifting away and becoming, going into the darkness. I don't think that resigning to the fact that it's a difficult time, but we'll make it through. I think that's probably part of the element. And then I launched Coffee with Humans back in April, because, like, you probably, like you sensed as well, people were really struggling with connection, and it seemed like there was a fog of darkness sort of descending on the land, and the people who were not becoming angry about it, some of those folks were the energy was moving in the opposite direction of just like, and this is where I die. This is terrible, and everything's getting worse, and this is the world ending as well. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not going to do that. I know what that feeling is like, and I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to make it super easy to connect. And I just popped out, I put out on LinkedIn, I'm going to have 52 coffees this year with people I don't know. And if you want to have coffee with me, I'll have coffee with you. And it was just like, boom, that day, people signed up to just talk about anything. And it showed me that there is this void of connection. Everybody feels it. We express that in different ways, though. And everybody to some degree is struggling in a unique way during this. And it's not all roses. Even the organizations that, they're like, hey, we thrive because we're, made PPE and stuff like that. It's like, that's cool. They're connected to somebody, across the street who's, lost their job and it's not coming back. And none of us, it is that time of war that this generation gets, where none of us are left untouched. It's just, what are you going to do with it? What's the opportunity? And so, it's great talking with folks like you who have a finger on the pulse of, minds and people and relationships. And your motivation, your drive is to, it seems to take whatever wisdom and skills and experience you have, and then how can you, positively infect, other folks, with something that's good, with tools they can use. And that, I think, is maybe people like that would not have that sort of drive in quite the same way, even had there not been a time of crisis, to be like, I have to do this,
It's very, very true. And that's the one, the one thing that we've definitely seen is that people have been really pushed to grow. A very early on amazing human that I knew back in the beginning of my career. She was actually my therapist when I was in my early 20s and training to be a therapist myself. And she used to say, when something was really hard, she would say, "Oh, that's an AFGO." And I said, "Well, what's an AFGO?" And she said, "It's another fucking growth opportunity."
Right.
Just what you need. Just when you didn't want to be any more evolved, any wiser, any smarter, any stronger, you get another growth opportunity just for you. And so, it's kind of, this whole thing feels like a big AFGO in so many ways. Granted, much, worse for many who are suffering in ways that are more irreparable, or who've had loss. There's so much grief. But for a lot of people, there's a lot of growing happening on a lot of different levels. And one of the things that I learned really early on, which has really helped me, and this kind of comes from my meditation and sort of more Buddhist studies background, is that suffering is really an inevitable part of life. And when you can adjust your expectations to accept that, then you can be a lot more present and open to the journey. And I think that has just been a key idea for me always around my relationship to pain and suffering, is that it's inevitable.
Absolutely. I think this is, I don't like to suffer, but I think this is an opportunity. And I wrote an article on LinkedIn called 15,000 Days Left, or Why I Dance. And I said, I've got probably 15,000 days left if I live an average lifespan. But I might not, because, on my father's side, people lived into their hundreds, so that could be a problem, And so anyhow, I was thinking, like, it was this idea of we've reached this time of, in this society, at least right now, in this generation, and in my generation, the one prior maybe, where we've not suffered intensely, not on a whole. On a whole, we've had it pretty good, and we expect that now, and we live with this myopic viewpoint that that's just what life is supposed to be. And when it veers outside of that, or whether we travel on the other side of the world and see that you're living a charmed life, and the things that we get to discuss and argue about whether we're going to, we are privileged, and we don't even know it because it's just our norm. And you can't even beat people up for it. It's like, it's a norm. You didn't know any different. And so, maybe it's good for us to have this time of suffering because it has a way of clarifying what's important and what's not important. And it has a way of pushing us forward or drawing us forward into with an energy that we otherwise would not have had. And then also, and so I brought it back into this idea. So like, maybe in all of this stuff, it also gives us appreciation for the things that we complained about before. And I said, so, maybe when we get back together, we can dance. And I drew the picture of what I say, something like, there's this pretty lady on the dance floor, and she looks back, and her guy's sitting at the table, and she's like beckoning him to come dance. And the guy's like, I'm not going to dance. I don't dance. And she's like, no, come on, dance. He's like, I'm not going to dance. And I said, he's clenching his drink in one hand and his pride in the other. and I was like, this is an opportunity to get over yourself. Go out and do the thing. Go out and do that thing that people are asking you to do. Go out and do that thing that you want to do. Get over it. Because, hey, maybe this will kill you, but you're going to die eventually. So you get through this, move through this, and just walk into that fullness of life. Live now, live fully now. Because everybody else who's so afraid of you of them living fully now wants to see that there's somebody who's going to do it, because that might give them the inclination to do it as well. So I don't know.
Love that. So true. So wise.
Well, I'm going to put your link up here, namastewellness.com, for those people who are in that point, maybe of need, or who want to have a follow-up conversation. Who are the folks that you're kind of speaking to in your sphere of influence?
Yeah, absolutely. So I speak with a lot of human resource leaders. I speak with a lot of leaders in the corporate space, CEOs, CFOs, CIOs that are trying to figure out how to support their organizations. And I've also had a long history of working with individuals. I'm at my heart and soul, I'm a therapist and a coach. I happen to own a business that does all these things, which is a huge passion of mine, but I love to work with people. And so I work with a lot of people in a wellness coaching capacity, primarily kind of people who are in leadership roles in some way, shape, or form. But that's my sphere. Awesome.
Well, thanks, Julie, for having coffee with me today. I appreciate it. To all our viewers and listeners, thanks for joining us for another Coffee with Humans.
Thanks, Jason.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
One of the things I love about Coffee with Humans are the raw conversations I get to have, meeting new people just like you. If you or someone you know should be on Coffee with Humans, go to coffeewithhumans.com. Remember, the only rule is no sales calls.
This has been Coffee with Humans. Subscribe to get updates or click to have coffee with me. coffeewithhumans.com.